There we go. All right. So welcome to the Cinder project update. We're going to give you an overview of what happened in Pike and what we're planning for Queens. I'm Jay Bryant, Cinder PTL, and I have with me
Sean McGinnis. I'm the former Cinder PTL.
So we're trying to demonstrate our peaceful power handoff here with continuing to do things together. So new format, we got 20 minutes, so I'm going to run through some of this kind of quickly. Want to leave time for Q&A at the end for everybody. I'm assuming if you're here, you're relatively familiar with Cinder. It's the block storage service for OpenStack. And here's a picture of how it functions. We're like many of the other OpenStack services where we've got a scheduler, an API, and then the volume services, and a number of storage drivers underneath that we manage. One thing that we forget to mention that has to be mentioned kind of repeatedly is, remember Cinder is not in the data path. It is control path. We stay out of the data path as much as possible and try to just manage the storage and let the backends actually handle the data path aspect of it. So something I think we forget to mention, and I try to bring it up now when I can to keep that in people's minds. Background, this is a picture from, I believe it was the Atlanta PTG. We had 293 contributors in Pike. It is a project that broke out of Nova back in the Folsom release. And we're in a lot of cloud deployments. We're in 89% at least of those that are reporting up to our user survey that they have it in production or test. And of that, 86 is in production, 3% in test. So I don't hear a lot of complaints about it. So I think it's working well. That's a good thing given those numbers. So, as I mentioned, we're going to have Sean go through what happened in Pike, and then I'll give you an idea of what we're working currently on in Queens and how that's coming along, and then we'll have a little time for question and answer at the end. So at this point, I will pass it off to Mr. McGinnis.
All right. And like Jay mentioned, with a shorter time, we're going to go through some of these quickly, but hopefully we'll have some Q&A time at the end if there's any of these items that you have questions about. So new drivers, every cycle we seem to get more drivers. We've added a couple more, Infinidat and Veritas in the Pike release, and of course we have more coming every cycle. Seems like there's always new storage. So the great thing about this is there is a pretty good support of whatever type of storage backend you may already have in your environment. So using Cinder to manage that should hopefully just be a matter of configuring Cinder to use something that's already there. We changed things with consistency groups, so that's something that we want to make sure that the word gets out there, because consistency groups were around for a while. We were starting to look at different things that we wanted to do with a group of volumes, and it wasn't necessarily always having consistent snapshots. So this was an effort that was started in Okata, I believe. We finally finished it in Pike to be switching over from the consistency group concept we had before to having these generic grouping of volumes where one of those grouping capabilities could be to create consistent snapshots. But the reason we went down that path initially is we wanted to add the ability to replicate a group of volumes. So if anyone's familiar with the existing replication support that we had in Cinder, it's very basic, kind of primitive to be able to support all the different types of storage that we use. So previously, you could only replicate an entire backend. It was configuration, all the volumes that were part of it would get replicated. And it was admin only. So we wanted to provide the ability to group a set of volumes by whatever type of logical grouping made sense and be able to replicate those volumes to a different storage backend.
And that did have an impact on the backend drivers as well, and I think we've made good progress in getting the necessary changes in for that as well.
Yeah.
From the various vendors.
Yep. One thing that has come up for quite a while is having the ability to extend a volume that's already in use. We had a restriction where if you wanted to make a volume bigger, you had to actually, maybe shut down your instance, detach it, extend the volume, and then reattach it to your instance, which could, it's disruptive. So we did add the support to be able to extend a volume that's already attached to an instance. Just there are a lot of caveats with that. So there's some things that you need to be aware of. It does have to have a Nova compute of Pike or later, so this won't work if you're running a mix of a newer Cinder and an older Nova. It only works with the Revert hypervisor driver, and right now we've only really tested with iSCSI and Fiber Channel. So there's some other protocols out there that we just haven't been able to really cover, just mainly as far as general accessibility for everyone to be able to do that. So this will give you the ability to extend a volume. It'll show up on the hypervisor, assuming you have all these other pieces in place as that larger size. Just to point out, though, that within the guest, there still is on the user or the consumer of that instance to be able to go in there and actually do what needs to be done to access the full larger size of that volume, whether that's extending the file system or however you're using that volume. And because there's all these caveats there, we did put in a config option where this could be disabled. So just to avoid any confusion, if there was a deployment where all of these necessary pieces weren't in place, that a user wouldn't be able to try this and then just fail. Another common ask in the past has been the ability to revert to a snapshot. That's now added just to be able to revert the volume back to the last snapshot. So this is one of the things where it took a lot of discussion for us. Some people wanted to be able to go back at any snapshot within the history of the volume. Based on the way some storage devices work, there could be different behavior by doing that. So really the safest way that we could handle this is just to go to the last snapshot. So doesn't mean that you can't go farther back, it's just that the revert functionality will only allow you to do one at a time. So if you do want to go back to the 5th snapshot in the history, you can do that. It's just revert, revert, revert to get there. So just a little extra work, but it makes it very explicit about where you're reverting that volume to, because there's a very real danger of data loss if you do that and you're not aware of what you're doing. This is probably a big news. Maybe should have made this its own slide, but I'm hoping it's not a big deal by this point. We had deprecated the V1 API for Cinder a long time ago, quite 2014, quite a while ago. But we kept that around because there were a lot of people still using V1. There are a lot of integrations out there with other projects in the open source community that were trying to do some type of Cinder OpenStack integration, but of course they're off doing their thing. They're not paying attention to what we're doing. So we wanted to give a lot of time to get the word out and for these other projects and internal tooling and things to be updated to move away from that before we actually ripped it out of there. So we hope we gave enough time now. If you have any internal tooling that's using the V1 API, before you upgrade, you're going to have to do a little conversion, but hopefully shouldn't be that big of a deal. The V1 API is completely gone now. V2 API is actually marked deprecated as well. So we're trying to move this along. We added microversions with the V3 API. V3 without the microversions is the same as V2. We really want to get everyone on V3 now. Then we should be done. We shouldn't have to go through this process anymore. We have V3. We can make changes through microversions, and we shouldn't hopefully ever need to even talk about doing a V4 API.
Shh, you'll jinx it. But come join the V3 party.
Yeah. So speaking of microversions, there were a lot of changes with microversions. I'm not going to go through all of these. So you can look through here and see if there's anything of interest. We do have a REST API history document that's published out under docs.openstack.org. That'll tell you what's available in each microversion. So if there's a specific functionality you're looking for, you can look through there, and it'll tell you specifically which version you need. I should also point out, if you are a user of our Cinder CLI, we do not automatically display the later microversion numbers or the capabilities that are enabled through the later microversions. So you just need to specify which microversion you're interested in to be able to get that access on the CLI.
And there is a environment option for setting that if you don't want to have to always manually specify it. So.
Yes, yes. Multi-attach. This is another one we've been talking about for quite a bit. This is the ability to have one volume attached to multiple instances, whether that is multiple instances on one compute host or instances spread across multiple Nova computes. There's been a lot of work being done for what, at a high level seems like should be a pretty simple thing, but we're working closely with the Nova team. There was a session yesterday on this, going through some of the little details of all the little bumps in the road that we've run into trying to get this done. But we're in really good shape. I'm not going to say it's going to be there because I think we've been alluding to that over the last few releases. It's still not there, but we've come a long way. We're hoping that in Queens we can get a little bit closer to actually being able to support that. And then that use case being able to run things like Oracle RAC in your OpenStack cloud, being able to do some type of clustering type of workload. And this is another one where just want to make sure the word gets out there, the awareness is out there. Multi-attach does not mean you can take your data and attach it to multiple instances and they can all read and write from that. You do need to have some type of clustered file system or some type of application that's aware of shared access to a block device. Otherwise, you have a very high potential for having data corruption.
Please don't shoot yourselves in the foot.
Yes.
We've given you the gun. Use it wisely.
Some other significant ones, maybe, depending what you're doing. If you're using the Albion backend, we now changed that to, by default, the type is auto. And what auto means is that if you have existing thickly provisioned volumes, it'll continue doing thick. But if it's greenfield, brand new LVM, it will, by default, do thin provisioned volumes. Ceph added the ability to specify custom keyring file. That was an ask for a while. And if you're using VMware vCenter, you can now specify the adapter type that gets exposed into the instance so that it will be able to optimize your data access in those VMs. So with that, I'll hand back to Jay to talk about what we're working on now.
Thank you, Sean. Everybody excited for Queens? Yeah, okay, there we go. Got to make sure you people are awake. So just the usual disclaimer that these are the items that we're planning for Queens, making good progress on them. But just because I say they're coming here does not mean that they will for sure be in Queens. So these were discussed at the PTG in Denver that we had back early in September. Had a really good meeting. Had 36 people from the Cinder group, from various vendors and everything there. It was a real good showing, real good discussion. We made some good progress there. You can always track how we're doing as far as getting our reviews done and what priorities we have at the Etherpad I have linked here. You'll be able to see that in the presentation afterwards. And if you go to the Cinder wiki, if you want details as to how we got to these discussions, down towards the bottom of our wiki page, there's a link to an overview and even all the notes from the PTG as to what we discussed and how we came to those decisions. So new functions that we're working on getting in place. So transfer volumes has been there for a while. Part of the problem, though, we discovered is that while the volume would transfer, the snapshots that were associated with that volume did not transfer. And as a result, the new user would get their volume and then decide, well, I don't need it anymore, try to delete it, and they couldn't because there were snapshots owned by another tenant that they could not access. So we've added the ability, or we're working on adding the ability to have the snapshots go with the volume. It's an option. I believe the plan is that the default will be to transfer ownership of the snapshots with the volume, so that then the new tenant isn't stuck in a state where they can't delete their volume. One of the things I should probably kind of mention here, we're in a point with Cinder where we're really working on trying to improve the UX, the experience that users are having, answering issues that people have seen there. And one of those that goes with that is improving what comes from the service list. Right now you just get information back that says, is the volume service running or not? Which it can be running and not be able to talk to your backend at all, which that information isn't helpful when you're trying to debug issues and you're like, okay, service is up, but I can't create volumes. Why? So we're going to add, working on adding the service list output to include information as to what the state of the backend is. Is it healthy? Is the volume service able to talk to the backend? That kind of information. So that should help in large user environments, debugging backends that have lost network connectivity or something like that. This is one that we've been talking about, working on for a while, and we've got some patches already moving towards this. So when you create a volume, it goes through the scheduler. The scheduler says, where do we have enough space for this? It knows the state of the system, gives it back, and then you're able to create your volume. But other functions like Snapshot and I'm trying to think what were some of the other cases that don't go through the scheduler. There were a number of them. We're not going through the scheduler, and so there would become a disconnect in some environments as to how much storage was actually available as compared to what Cinder thought was available. So we're working on fixing that now. So snapshots, group creation, clones, we'll go through the scheduler now, and we'll have a more consistent view of how much capacity is really available to Cinder for all of the different types of storage you may have on your back end. Default policy and code, this is a movement in general for OpenStack. It's a good thing for Cinder. So your policies will now be defined in the code. You don't have to have that big policy.json file in etc Cinder unless you have policies that you want to change from the default. So one of the advantages there is that, if you do have policies that you're setting just for your environment, it's going to be clear which ones you have changed, because those are the only ones that you'll have to put in the JSON file. This also improves our ability to document what policies are default in an automated fashion and make sure that they all get pulled out of the code when we're building our documentation, which leads me into documentation improvements. As we've pulled documentation from the documentation project into Cinder, I'm a kind of nerdy guy who likes to make sure we have good documents because, well, I've got an English background too. So we're pulling those in. I'm really making sure that now when we get patches that impact the documentation, that they come with the change that describes what is being changed, so that the end users are going to get a better experience when they need to go look and find out what driver config options are out there or what options do what. We're also trying to improve the readability of all the API information. We had a lot of stuff that was not properly formatted and had our documentation build was not good and we didn't realize it, so we're fixing that up. You should see, in Pike it was better. I think in Queens you're going to see an even better result there. Replication failback. So we've got replication, and there has been a lot of hacky stuff that has to happen after you have a failure to fail back to the original. We documented how to go in, play with the database to make it happen, but we're working on actually putting in the right commands to support that during Queens, and hopefully that will be a better experience for users as well. And we already covered on multi-attach. I think we're making good progress. So no promises, but we're hopeful. I can at least say that much. And we're also adding the ability to do a more generic backup implementation where you can back up to another volume driver rather than having to have a backup service. This too requires us to get backup scheduling to go through the scheduler, so there's some work there, but we've got one of our team members who's invested in that, and I think we should be able to see that during Queens. I think that'll be a nice option for people who don't necessarily have a separate backup storage environment but want to use the storage they have to back up their volumes. So we're short on time here. I'm just going to wrap up quickly. We're not changing, we decided we're not going to change the required functionality in order to be an accepted Cinder backend. I do need to make a plea to all of you for help. We've deprecated and removed the fiber channel, Cisco fiber channel zone manager. If there's anybody who's using that and would like to help us get a CI put together for it, we'd appreciate it. We hate to have to remove it, but Cisco has not been able to set up a third-party CI for us, so due to policy, we've removed it. We also, Sean didn't mention this, but we have a number of drivers in Queens that have been removed due to lack of following test policy. So please be aware of that. They were deprecated in Pike, so you should be aware of it if your users are using any of those. Here's some reference links, and I also make a call. We need help with reviews and development. If you're interested, we're a happy, friendly team. Come join us on OpenStack-Cinder on IRC. Any questions real quick?
We're also over time, so if you do have any other questions, maybe better we'll be out in the hallway and
sure.
we can take anything out there.
We won't run away.
Yeah.
So, in other words, thank you for your attention and your interest, and we'll see you in Vancouver.